Recently, I've been looking to broaden my ARPG horizons. I grew up playing Diablo 2, jumped into Diablo 3 at launch, did a full playthrough of Torchlight 2, and then spent thousands of hours in Diablo 4 when that came out. But now I feel it's finally time to try something new. That's where this game, Hero Siege, came in. A Diablo-inspired pixel art ARPG that's suddenly blown up on Steam, recently hitting around 10,000 concurrent players thanks to its latest season update. It caught my attention immediately, especially since it was under $3, so I figured I'd give the game a try. So in this video, I'll be sharing my first impressions after nearly 20 hours of gameplay. I'll talk about the class I chose, how far I got into the game, what I've enjoyed so far, and some things that haven't clicked with me yet. I wanted to capture my thoughts early before I dive deeper into the game and lose that fresh perspective. If you're curious about Hero Siege or considering jumping in yourself, stick around, I'll give you a clear picture of what to expect when you first start out. Before we dive into the gameplay, it's worth noting that Hero Siege has actually been around for over a decade. It started out as an action roguelike, but evolved over the years into the loot-heavy ARPG it is today. This dramatic shift in gameplay style might explain its current mixed rating of around 50% on Steam, as some longtime players haven't loved all the changes. But since I'm brand new to Hero Siege and didn't experience those earlier versions or even know this game existed, I'm not going to focus on its past. Instead, I'll be talking exclusively about how it plays right now. So after launching Hero Siege, the first thing you'll see is the main menu, where you have the option to play either locally or online. To access seasonal content, you'll need to choose Play Online, and the game will prompt you to create an account. I personally decided against this after doing some quick research about the differences between seasonal and non-seasonal gameplay. Unlike Diablo 4, where each new season introduces fresh mechanics that require you to roll a seasonal character to experience, Hero Siege's seasonal changes seem to mostly revolve around leaderboards and exclusive cosmetics awarded to the top-ranked players. In other words, the gameplay itself doesn't significantly change from what I could gather. There's also a game mode called Odyssey, which functions similarly to a solo self-found mode, meaning no trading or joining other players. Additionally, with the recent explosion in the game's popularity, I saw reports of login queues and occasional lag for online play. Since I plan to play solo anyway, I decided to avoid any online headaches by selecting local play instead. Now it's time to choose a character. Hero Siege has been around for over 10 years, so naturally there's a huge variety of classes, 23 in total. Impressively, the base game alone gives you access to 8 of these classes right away, which is honestly quite generous. Considering the game cost me less than $3, I'm perfectly fine with the idea of paying a few extra dollars to unlock additional classes down the line if I want. But for now, the 8 available options offer plenty of variety. Scanning the classes, I immediately spotted my childhood favorite, the Necromancer, which was the first class I played in Diablo 2 back in 2000. Choosing this class felt like a perfect way to start my Hero Siege experience. So let's hit play, jump in, and see how this goes. Right after jumping into the game, the first thing I did was hit the escape key and click this book, or maybe it's a tomb icon. Immediately I was hit with what felt like an overwhelming flood of information about mechanics I wasn't even close to unlocking yet. Rune words, crafting, jewel crafting, prospecting. Now, as someone who spent years playing Diablo 2, I at least had some familiarity with rune words and crafting systems, but I could definitely see how newcomers might feel completely overwhelmed here. For now, let's just put that aside and focus on the fun part, slaying monsters. Hero Siege follows that classic loot-driven dungeon crawler formula: kill, loot, level up, upgrade your gear, and then just repeat. As you defeat enemies, you'll quickly gain experience and level up, which allows you to allocate points into attributes and skills. You'll want to carefully spend these points depending on your class and build, although fortunately the game is extremely forgiving when it comes to reallocating both attribute and skill points, letting you experiment freely. Since I chose Necromancer, I realized I should be focusing primarily on intelligence, investing just enough points into energy to avoid mana problems, and dumping everything else into vitality. I learned this lesson the hard way after hitting a pretty frustrating difficulty spike later on, but I'll talk more about that in a bit. Skill-wise, each class in Hero Siege has just 2 skill trees, which I personally appreciated as a newcomer because it made the game feel simpler and more approachable compared to Diablo 2's standard 3 trees per class. And since playing a Summoner Necro was basically my childhood power fantasy, that's the route I chose here as well. Even at level 1 with just a single skeleton minion, it felt like my character was doing plenty of damage, which was encouraging. Now, besides roaming the world and slaying monsters, Hero Siege also offers optional side quests. Some quests involve finding and using special items called relics. Relics are these items that drop randomly in the world from chests and bosses, or can be crafted back in town. There are 4 distinct types, or at least 4 types that I found. Active relics, which you trigger manually to produce specific effects, often needed for quests. Orbitable relics, which circle around your character, either dealing damage to nearby enemies or blocking incoming hits. Stat relics, straightforward items that provide passive bonuses to your stats. And then on-hit proc relics, items that trigger special effects whenever your attacks land on enemies. All these elements combined create a gameplay loop that's familiar but compelling, especially if you're into loot-driven dungeon crawlers like I am. Something I completely missed until around level 13 was the existence of subclasses for your skills. Next to certain skills, there's a small plus sign icon. Clicking it brings up another screen displaying an inverted pentagram full of additional skills and upgrades. You gain 1 subclass point per 5 character levels, and let me tell you, discovering this was a huge game changer. I went from having just 1 warrior and 1 mage summoned to suddenly having 3 of each, which massively boosted my effectiveness in combat. At the end of each branch, there are larger nodes that can be further upgraded at levels 60, 80, and 100 respectively. Unfortunately, since my character only hit level 57, I haven't experienced these powerful upgrades yet, but I'm definitely looking forward to seeing how much stronger they'll make my Necromancer. Another mechanic worth mentioning is charms, special items that grant various bonuses like increased mana, movement speed, or resistances. Unlike Diablo 2, where charms automatically grant their bonuses just by being in your inventory, Hero Siege requires you to explicitly equip them into a dedicated charm area next to your gear. Honestly, I didn't figure this out until around 15 hours into the game. For some reason, my brain just interpreted this charm equip area as empty decorative UI space designed to keep things symmetrical. So when I finally realized my mistake, it was definitely a big facepalm moment. And that actually leads me to my first major dislike about Hero Siege. There are tons of deep and interesting systems here. Subclasses, charms, augments, codexes, glyphs, hero levels, bifrosts, and probably more, but the game doesn't clearly explain any of these mechanics. I'll talk more about this lack of explanation in my dislike section coming up soon. But to wrap up this section on a more positive note, I was really happy to see that Hero Siege includes a built-in loot filter, allowing you to display only the specific item rarities you actually want to pick up. By around level 10, I was already finding satanic tier gear. I'll show on screen all the different item rarities so you can have a clear idea of what I mean. Once I started seeing higher tier loot all the time, I found myself no longer interested in common white, superior blue, or even rare gold items. Using the loot filter, I simply disabled those lower tier items from dropping visibly, which drastically reduced clutter and made looting much faster and more enjoyable. It's a fantastic quality of life feature, and I wish more ARPGs had something similar built directly into the game. Moving on to likes and dislikes, one of the biggest strengths of Hero Siege is simply its incredible value. Whether you pick it up on sale for around $3 like I did, or even at full price, which is only about $8, you're getting a game absolutely packed with content. As I mentioned earlier, you immediately gain access to 8 playable classes, 7 distinct acts to explore, and I've already sunk about 20 hours into the game without even hitting level 60 yet. In terms of pure gameplay per dollar, it's honestly pretty hard to beat if you're someone who cares about that. Another major plus is how rewarding the character progression feels. My Necromancer became stronger as I played. First noticeable when I discovered the powerful sub-skills around level 13, and later at level 30 when I started heavily investing points into Vengeful Spirit and Summon Mastery. Getting my first rune word, Torment, also marked a big turning point, greatly speeding up my farming efficiency and making the game feel even more satisfying. The quick load times and low system requirements are another highlight. Hero Siege makes it incredibly easy to jump into quick sessions. You can load into an area, farm some loot, and log out whenever you want. But my favorite aspect might be the loot system itself. Hero Siege consistently showers you with meaningful upgrades, unique relics, and powerful rune words. The frequent drops and deep customization options keep progression fresh and exciting, actively encouraging experimentations with different builds. Like I mentioned before, by level 10, I already had several satanic items, which felt fantastic and gave me a strong incentive to keep playing, hunting for even better gear. Now on to my biggest frustration with Hero Siege, and this is something I mentioned briefly earlier. The game does a really poor job of explaining its systems. When you're brand new to the game, trying to figure out how everything works can feel almost impossible. It's even worse if you try Googling for solutions, since Hero Siege has been redesigned multiple times over its decade-plus history, making information confusing or outdated. Take rune words as a perfect example. Yes, the in-game help book, or tomb, or whatever you call it, clearly shows you every available rune word combination, which is great. But what it completely fails to mention is how to actually use a rune word. It doesn't tell you that you need a common white item with exactly the right number of sockets, or that you must insert the runes in a specific order. Now, if you're someone who's played Diablo 2, you probably know this system inside out because Hero Siege basically copied it exactly. Even the rune words themselves are directly borrowed. Torment is essentially Diablo 2's white, and Divine Contemplation is basically Ancient's Pledge. But if you're a new player who's never touched Diablo 2 or this genre before, you'll probably feel lost. Even after you beat the final boss, the game just teleports you back to the Act 1 town, and that's it. As a Diablo veteran, I know that this means I need to quit the game, bump up the difficulty to Nightmare, and start a new game, but new players won't know this. I think the developers need to do a better job onboarding newcomers and explaining these important mechanics to avoid overwhelming them early on. My second major issue has to do with difficulty, specifically boss difficulty on normal. Most bosses were fine, but two in particular gave me a massive headache. Gurag, the Act 1 boss, and Anubis, the Act 3 boss. I literally spent hours on these bosses, and if it weren't for me planning to make this video, I honestly might have just quit the game altogether. Now don't get me wrong, I'm completely fine with bosses being tough on Nightmare, Hell, or Inferno difficulties, but on normal, being forced to optimize every skill point and attribute choice just to survive feels excessive. That's exactly what happened to me against Anubis. My minions weren't dealing enough damage, and I kept getting one-shot by these electrified walls, which weirdly enough looked like fire, but actually did electrical damage. This frustration is exactly why I mentioned earlier that I ended up dumping nearly all of my points into Vitality just to survive this encounter. In my opinion, normal difficulty should let players comfortably experiment with builds without hitting huge roadblocks. Save the intense min-maxing and optimization for higher difficulties. Another dislike is the way town portals work, or rather don't work. In Hero Siege, if you drop a town portal right before a boss fight and then die during that fight, the portal disappears once you respawn back in town. Instead of quickly jumping back into the action, you're forced to spend an extra minute or two running back through areas you've already cleared just to get another shot at the boss. Considering how heavily Hero Siege borrows mechanics from Diablo 2, it's surprising and honestly frustrating that they didn't also copy Diablo's more player-friendly approach to town portals. Small inconveniences like this really stand out, especially when you're repeatedly dying to difficult bosses. Lastly, I found the leveling process itself pretty slow. Granted, part of that was on me, completing every side quest, dying frequently and losing experience every time I died. Now that I've figured out better farming spots and boss strategies, I do think leveling will speed up significantly from here. Still, it felt quite slow for a normal playthrough, and I wish progression was just a little faster early on. So, after all of that, is Hero Siege worth playing? Well, my answer largely depends on your experience with ARPGs. If you're someone who's already familiar with Diablo 2 or other similar games and understands how these kinds of systems typically work, then yeah, especially if you can pick it up on sale for around $3, I'd say give it a shot. There's definitely fun to be had here. However, if you're new to ARPGs and this is one of your first experiences, I'd have to caution you against jumping straight into Hero Siege despite its very affordable price. The onboarding process can be confusing, and the lack of clear explanations for many core systems might leave you feeling frustrated or overwhelmed. Since the game has apparently been redesigned multiple times over the past decade, it can be hard to find accurate, up-to-date information when looking things up online, which adds to the confusion. As for me, I plan on sticking around for now. My goal is to reach at least level 100, explore more endgame content, and develop a deeper understanding of what makes Hero Siege stand out. Hopefully this will give me a clearer picture so I can provide a more in-depth review down the line. But as of right now, my main question still remains. What exactly makes Hero Siege worth playing over its older, inspiring brother, Diablo 2? Thanks so much for watching. Have you played Hero Siege or are you thinking about trying it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.